I am Mike Bevel. This is Footnotes. And then there'd be like some sort of musical thing that happened here. Maybe if I were professional and not just me, this microphone, my camera, and copy Middlemarch, which we are reading together chapter by chapter. We're up to chapter 4, which you would know already because you read the title. So, but puzzled people cannot laugh. Sometimes George Eliot, not sometimes, a lot of times in this book, she opens the chapter with a quotation. And sometimes she attributes a quotation, and we know that it came from Cervantes. Or, oh, I like the way I said that. Let's remember that I said that really well. Or Milton a lot. But then sometimes the quotation isn't footnoted or isn't sourced. And that means that George Eliot just wrote it herself. She came up with this. So chapter 4 appears to come from a play. And first gentleman says, "Our deeds are fetters that we forge ourselves." And the second gentleman says, "I truly, but I think it is the world that brings the iron." So, yeah, our life is what we make of it. Not all of us get the same kind of materials. It is an interesting point of view that George Eliot is exploring. And she's exploring it, I think, in this book. By the way, I may get the Nixon sweats, and you may notice it. It's humid a little, and I just went on a bike ride. Not to brag. Anyway, what if we just jump right into the chapter? Unless was I seeing something before then? Oh, yeah, I think Eliot is discussing the plight of women, certainly. Women are not given the same opportunity. They're not given the same iron. The world provides the iron. And it can provide the iron to shackle you, or it can provide the iron for you to make something with. And yeah, it's kind of that boomer argument of why aren't you doing more with your life? And Gen Xers and millennials and whatever comes after millennials, we've got to stop naming generations, guys. We're going to run out of words. But like they all say, well, you didn't leave us a lot to work with. But then also I think about the boomers and their parents who, came through a war and what that must have been like to grow up with war parents. I think, which is something I didn't do. My dad was in the service, but out of the service by the time I was born, and not in the service actively while I was alive. Maybe he's in God's army now. I don't know. Does God have an army? Onward, Christian soldier. We're going way off track. I haven't even started. Chapter 4. "Sir James seems determined to do everything you wish," said Celia, as they were driving home from an inspection of the new building site. "He is a good creature, and more sensible than anyone would imagine," said Dorothea, inconsiderately. "You mean that he appears silly?" No, said Dorothea, recollecting herself and laying her hand on her sister's a moment. "But he does not talk equally well on all subjects." "I should think none but disagreeable people do," said Celia in her usual purring way. "They must be very dreadful to live with. Only think, at breakfast, always." Dorothea laughed. "Oh, Kitty, you are a wonderful creature." She pinched Celia's chin, being in the mood now to think her very winning and lovely, fit hereafter to be an eternal cherub. And if it were not doctrinally wrong to say so, hardly more in need of salvation than a squirrel. "Of course, people need not be always talking well. Only one tells the quality of their minds when they try to talk well." Oh, let's try that sentence again. Of course, people need not be always talking well. Only one tells the quality of their minds when they try to talk well. "You mean that Sir James tries and fails?" "Well, I was speaking generally. Why do you catechize me about Sir James? It is not the object of his life to please me." "Now, Dodo, you don't really believe that?" "Certainly. He thinks of me as a future sister. That is all." Dorothy had never hinted this before, waiting from a certain shyness on such subjects, which was mutual. No editing. Certainly he thinks of me as a future sister, that is all. Dorothea had never hinted this before, waiting for a certain shyness on such subjects, which was mutual between the sisters until it should be introduced by some divisive event. Celia blushed, but said at once, "Pray do not make that mistake any longer, Dodo. When Tantripp was brushing my hair the other day, she said that Sir James's man knew from Mrs. Cadwallader's maid that Sir James was to marry the eldest Miss Brooke." "How can you let Tantripp talk such gossip to you, Celia?" said Dorothea indignantly, not the less angry because details asleep in her memory were now awakened to confirm the unwelcome revelation. "You must have asked her questions. It is degrading. Let's have a little bit of tea." Jasmine. Not my favorite, but it's what I have with caffeine in the house, and I'm not doing coffee. And I'm getting some tea soon. Don't care. Will I care? No one will care. But know that I'm getting tea soon. I see no harm at all in Tantripp's talking to me. It is better to hear what people say. You see what mistakes you make by taking up notions. I am quite sure that Sir James means to make you an offer, and he believes that you will accept him, especially since you've been so pleased with him about the plans. And Uncle, too. I know he expects it. Everyone can see Sir James is very much in love with you. The revulsion was so strong and painful in Dorothea's mind that the tears welled up and flowed abundantly. All her dear plans were embittered, and she thought with disgust of Sir James's conceiving that she recognized him as her lover. There was vexation, too, on account of Celia. How could he expect it? She burst forth in her most impetuous manner. I didn't do that very impetuously, did I? I have never agreed with him about anything but the cottages. I was barely polite to him before. Just a quick thing I will share that I am learning in reading out loud, which I don't do a lot of, is, and I've mentioned this to some people, maybe this is the first time you're hearing it. There is, you know what sight reading is in music? It is where you're just given the music and you play it. You've never seen it before. You don't know how it goes. And you just sort of follow the instructions on the sheet of music. Some people are really excellent sight players and sort of intuitively know what needs to happen with the music. Like they seem to understand. I think that's the same thing with reading. Wait, let me go back. So some people are terrific sight readers and they play beautifully, and some people are not terrific sight readers. They can get through and then they start to think about what the music is saying. They eventually get to the place where the piece is doing what they want it to do. And I think with reading, it's the same thing. There are people who are just terrific sight readers. I am not among them. And then there are people who, like me, find out at the end of a sentence, oh, it was supposed to be said a different way. And you don't notice it as much when you're reading to yourself. Or maybe you do. I don't want to tell you how you read. It's my experience. I don't notice it when I'm reading to myself. It just all becomes part of the flavor. It's just sort of, it's like I'm watching this movie, and so I fix things in post. Anyway, let's keep going. But you have been so pleased with him since then, he has begun to feel quite sure that you are fond of him. Fond of him, Celia. How can you choose such odious expressions? Said Dorothea passionately. Dear me, Dorothea, I suppose it would be right for you to be fond of a man whom you accepted for a husband. It is offensive to me to say that Sir James could think I was fond of him. Besides, it is not the right word for the feeling I must have towards the man I would accept as a husband. Well, I am sorry for Sir James. I thought it right to tell you because you went on as you always do, never looking just where you are and treading in the wrong place. You see what nobody else sees. It is impossible to satisfy you, yet you never see what is quite plain. That's your way, Dodo. Something certainly gave Celia unusual courage, and she was not sparing the sister of whom she was occasionally in awe. Who can tell what just criticisms Mur the cat may be passing on as themes of wider speculation? Mur the cat is a character in a Hoffman story. Hoffman, maybe we'll do Hoffman sometime. That guy is, he's a weirdo. maybe he was like the Guillermo del Toro of his time, if you can say that about, is he German? Let's say he's German for right now. Maybe he's Swiss. They all blend together, vaguely Nordic-y, Germany, all that. Habsburg news. And that Habsburg face, you've all seen pictures of Carlos II, who is part of the Habsburg line. Look that up. I'm just giving you an assignment. Look up a picture of Charles II, or I think they called him Charles the Wicked. Yeah, that guy did not do well. It is very painful, said Dorothea, feeling scourged. I can have no more to do with the cottages. I must be uncivil to him. I must tell him I will have nothing to do with them. It is very painful. Her eyes again filled with tears. Wait a little. Think about it. You know he is going away for a day or two to see his sister. There will be nobody besides Lovegood. Celia could not help relenting. Poor Dodo, she went on in an amicable staccato. It is very hard. It is your favorite fad to draw plans. Fad to draw plans? Do you think I only care about my fellow creatures' houses in that childish way? I may well make mistakes. I may well make mistakes. How can one ever do anything nobly Christian living among people with such petty thoughts? No more was said. Dorothea was too much jarred to recover her temper and behave so as to show that she admitted any error in herself. She was disposed rather to accuse the intolerable narrowness and the purblind conscience of the society around her. And Celia was no longer the eternal cherub, but a thorn in her spirit, a pink and white Nullifidian. Nullifidian means skeptic, according to the footnote. Worse than any discouraging presence in the Pilgrim's Progress. The fad of drawing plans. What was life worth? What great faith was possible when the whole effect of one's actions could be withered up into such parched rubbish as that? When she got out of the carriage, her cheeks were pale and her eyelids red. She was an image of sorrow, and her uncle, who met her in the hall, would have been alarmed if Celia had not been close to her, looking so pretty and composed that he at once concluded Dorothea's tears to have their origin in her excessive religiousness. He had returned during their absence from a journey to the county town about a petition for the pardon of some criminal. Oh, I'm curious about petition for the pardon of some criminal. So Eliot has another book. She has Adam Bede, which is an early novel she wrote. And there is a criminal who needs pardoning. What if this is all in the same universe? It probably isn't. I don't remember the dates of Adam Bede. But yeah, like if you guys wanted to do, you guys being Hollywood, because I know fingers on the pulse, you could do like a whole Middlemarch series with an Adam Bede add-on. And I would give you all of my money to do it. Well, my dears, he said kindly as they went up to kiss him, I hope nothing disagreeable has happened while I have been away. No, uncle, said Celia. We have been to Freshet to look at the cottages. We thought you would have been at home to lunch. Oh, I came by Lowick to lunch. You didn't know I came by Lowick. And I have brought a couple of pamphlets for you, Dorothea. In the library, you know. They lie on the table in the library. It seemed as if an electric stream went through Dorothea, thrilling her from despair into expectation. They were pamphlets about the early church. The oppression of Celia, Tantripp, and Sir James was shaken off, and she walked straight to the library. Celia went upstairs. Mr. Brooke was detained by a message, but when he re-entered the library, he found Dorothea seated and already deep in one of the pamphlets, which had some marginal manuscript of Mr. Casaubon's, taking it in as eagerly as she might have taken in the scent of a fresh bouquet after a dry, hot, dreary walk. She was getting away from Tipton and Freshet and her own sad liability to tread in the wrong places on her way to the New Jerusalem. That's a tea break. Jasmine isn't too terrible. We do like Jasmine. Mr. Brooks sat down in his armchair, stretched his legs toward the wood fire, which had fallen into a wondrous mass of glowing dice among the dogs, and rubbed his hands gently, looking very mildly towards Dorothea, but with a neutral, leisurely air, as if she had nothing particular to say. Dorothea closed her pamphlet as soon as she was aware of her uncle's presence, and rose as if to go. Usually she would have been interested about her uncle's merciful errand on behalf of the criminal, but her late agitation had made her absent-minded. "I came back by Lowick, you know," said Mr. Brooke, not as if with any intention to arrest her departure, but apparently from his usual tendency to say what he had said before. This fundamental principle of human speech was markedly exhibited in Mr. Brooke. "I lunched there and saw Casaubon's library, and that kind of thing. There's a sharp air driving. Won't you sit down, my dear? You look cold." Dorothea felt quite inclined to accept the invitation. Sometimes, when her uncle's easy way of taking things did not happen to be exasperating, it was rather soothing. She threw off her mantle and bonnet and sat down opposite to him, enjoying the glow, but lifting up her beautiful hands for a screen. They were not thin hands or small hands, but powerful, feminine, maternal hands. She seemed to be holding them up in propitiation for her passionate desire to know and to think, which in the unfriendly mediums of Tipton and Freshet had issued in crying and red eyelids. She bethought herself now of the condemned criminal. "What news have you brought about the sheep's..." Oh, well, okay, there we go. We can't do the cut. We can't do the Adam B crossover because the criminal in Adam B is not a male sheep stealer. She bethought herself now of the condemned criminal. "What news have you brought about the sheep stealer, uncle?" "What, poor Bunch? Well, it seems we can't get him off. He is to be hanged." Dorothea's brow took an expression of reprobation and pity. "Hanged, you know," said Mr. Brooke with a quiet nod. "Poor Romilly. He would have helped us. I knew Romilly. Casaubon didn't know Romilly. Romilly is Sir Samuel Romilly. He was an English statesman. And he worked for criminal reform. So he wanted to see fewer people hanged for things. He was the Sister Helen Prejean of his day. Let me tell you this story really quickly. My friend Bill does costume work for the Kennedy Center Opera House, and he invited me to an invited dress rehearsal of, I think it was an invited dress rehearsal or just like an early, anyway, I got to see a production of the opera Dead Man Walking. Now, is it a good opera? No. Yeah, I'll talk about that sometime, or I won't talk about it. I probably will never talk. It didn't do anything for me. I liked being there, but it was also very weird and oddly sexual. And I didn't know what to do, but I'm sitting there with Bill and his husband. No, senility. Anyway, Bill and his husband, whose name will occur to me at some point later, and I will shout it out, and you will hopefully remember this part of the conversation. I'm there. We're sitting, sight me, Bill, husband, who I thought his name would just pop into my head just then. And there's like a bustle behind us, and I don't look around because bustle will make me very anxious in my seat. And there's this bustle behind me, and I hear someone say, "Well, where do you want to sit, Helen?" And it becomes very clear to me that sitting directly behind me is Sister Helen Prejean, who is one of my heroes because I'm very anti-death penalty. And she is too. And so we sat through the first half, up to intermission, and I kind of heard the opera, but mostly was just thinking, Sister Helen Prejean, Sister Helen Prejean, Sister Helen Prejean. Can I say something to Sister Helen Prejean? What can I say to Sister Helen Prejean? And so intermission happens. We gab a bit with each other. And Josh, his name is Josh. Bill's husband's name is Josh. Finally. We come back and I realize that, and you don't realize this because I'm sitting. Maybe you know me, maybe you don't, but I'm a tall guy and I'm a big-sized guy. I'm a bear-sized guy. And so I remember turning around and saying, I'm gonna scoot way down in my seat so you can see above me. And she reached out and she grabbed my shoulders and she said, darling, you have to do no such thing. And it was, what a wonderful moment of grace to be given by a stranger who you admire also, like to find out, oh, they're just genuinely a great person. And I'm basing only on the fact that she didn't make me sit in an uncomfortable position. I think she had seen the opera a time or two before. It's been around a while. This was just, I think, the Kennedy Center premiere. There's a whole scene with men in cell blocks just thrusting their crotches, which you might expect in some of your burlesque shows or male strippers, but maybe in an opera it seemed odd. But everything in an opera is odd, isn't it? All right. Anyway, we've gone too far on this. Let's just keep going. She was getting away from Tipton and Freshet and her own sad liability to tread in the, you're going to hear my brother, by the way, who cannot keep quiet. He just mutters to himself, so I'm sorry. She was getting away from Tipton and Freshet and her own sad liability to tread in the wrong places on her way to the New Jerusalem. Mr. Brooke sat down in his armchair, stretched his legs toward the wood fire, which had fallen into a wondrous mass of glowing dice between the dogs, and rubbed his hands gently, looking very mildly towards Dorothea, but with a natural, leisurely air. I think I've gone through all this. Oh, I have gone through all this. Guys, we went back too far. Okay. Hanged, you know, said Mr. Brooke with a quiet nod. Poor Romilly. He would have helped us. I knew Romilly. Casaubon didn't know Romilly. He's a little buried in books, you know who Casaubon is. When a man has great studies and is writing a great work, he must, of course, give up seeing much of the world. How can he go about making acquaintances? That's true. But a man mopes, you know. I've always been a bachelor too, but I have that sort of disposition that I never moped. It was my way to go about everywhere and take in everything. I never moped. But I can see that Casaubon does, you know. He wants a companion, you know. I want to stop here and just talk really quickly about bachelor uncles in the 19th century, because it can mean two things. One way we can think about bachelor uncles is they're the gay uncles, and that's just what they were called because the word gay wasn't really in use in the 19th century in that way. But it was a way to just mention an uncle is not married and not into women. The other way bachelor uncle can be used is just somebody who doesn't want to marry, and more than likely, because, I mean, men are from Mars and women are from Venus. It's a terrible book that we're never going to read together. But I think Mr. Brooke strikes me as someone who would visit a professional and pay her or him money. I think he has an arrangement. This is all supposition. I don't know if the book supports this or not. It's just what I think might happen. And that's all we're going to say. Bachelor uncles. When you read the phrase bachelor uncle, especially in The Woman in White, like when you read The Woman in White and there's an uncle in there who's absolutely gay as pants. And he's delightful. Okay, so let's see. That's true, but a man, he wants a companion, you know. It would be a great honor to anyone to be his companion, said Dorothea energetically. You like him, eh? Said Mr. Brooke, without showing any surprise or other emotion. I wrote something in the margin here. So I wrote in the margin, contrast between the name-dropping Brooke, who actually does good, like he goes to try to get a man unexecuted, and the pious Casaubon, who doesn't. Mr. Brooke, for all of his posturing and all of his name-dropping, is a force for good in the world, and Mr. Casaubon is a force for himself. Just an interesting point to think about. You like him, eh? Said Mr. Brooke without showing any surprise or other emotion. Well, now I've known Casaubon 10 years, ever since he came to Lowick, but I never got anything out of him, any ideas, you know. However, he is a tip-top man and may be a bishop, that kind of thing, you know, if Peel stays in. This all has to do, so Peel is Robert Peel, and is it Robert Peel? We have Google. Let's just take a little trip on Google. E.N. Robert Peel. Yes, I got the name right finally. I just had to look it up to confirm because I don't trust what I know. And maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. Maybe we shouldn't always trust everything we know. Maybe our job is to examine what we think we know and see what happens. He is a tip-top man and maybe a bishop, that kind of thing, you know, if Peel stays in. And he has a very high opinion of you, my dear. Dorothea could not speak. The novel is not a political novel. Is that fair to say? The novel is really interested in human relationships, but she's setting it at a time that is pretty politically rife. It would be like setting a novel during the early days of the first Iraq War in the 90s, or in the second Iraq War post 9/11, or if you set it in Vietnam, like that's going to come in, that's going to have an effect. And actually, one of the arguments that people will have about Jane Austen is how little interested she seems to be in the grand affairs that are happening. And she really focuses on a human level rather than on a grand scale level. So she doesn't write about wars very much, though her novels are filled with people in the service. And she isn't necessarily interested so very much in politics. She's slippery about that. Like she's easy to pin down about irony and love and romance and character and morals, and she's less easy to pin down about her politics or her just what she's thinking about. Actually, let's close this window because I think it helps when I record to not have so many things draining the Wi-Fi signal. And he has a very high opinion of you, my dear. Dorothea could not speak. The fact is, he has a very high opinion indeed of you, and he speaks uncommonly well, does Casaubon. He has deferred to me for not being of age. In short, I have promised to speak to you, though I told him I thought there were not much that... In short, I have promised to speak to you, though I told him I thought there was not much chance. I was bound to tell him that. I said, my niece is very young, and that kind of thing. But I didn't think it necessary to go into everything. However, the long and short of it is that he has asked my permission to make you an offer of marriage. Of marriage, you know, said Mr. Brooke with his explanatory nod. I thought it better to tell you, my dear. No one could have detected any anxiety in Mr. Brooks's manner, but he did really wish to know something of his niece's mind, that if there were any need for advice, he might give it in time. What feeling he, as a magistrate who had taken in so many ideas, could make room for was unmixedly kind. Since Dorothea did not speak immediately, he repeated, I thought it better to tell you, my dear. Thank you, uncle, said Dorothea in a clear, unwavering tone. I am very grateful to Mr. Casaubon. If he makes me an offer, I shall accept him. I admire and honor him more than any man I ever saw. Mr. Brooke paused a little and then said in a lingering low tone, Oh, well, he is a good match in some respects, but now Chatham is a good match, and our lands lie together. I shall never interfere again against your wishes, my dear. People should have their own way in marriage and that sort of thing, up to a certain point, you know. I've always said that, up to a certain point. I wish you to marry well, and I have good reason to believe that Chatham wishes to marry you. I mention it, you know. It is impossible that I should ever marry Sir James Chatham, said Dorothea. If he thinks of marrying me, he has made a great mistake. So that is it, you see. One never knows. I should have thought Chatham was just the sort of man a woman would like now. Pray do not mention him in that light again, uncle, said Dorothea, feeling some of her late irritation revive. Mr. Brooke wondered and felt that women were an inexhaustible subject of study, since even he at his age was not in a perfect state of scientific prediction about them. Here was a fellow like Chatham with no chance at all. Well, but Casaubon now, there's no hurry. I mean, for you, it's true every year will tell upon him. He is over 45, you know. I should say a good 27 years older than you. To be sure, if you like learning and standing and that sort of thing, we can't have everything. And his income is good. He has a handsome property, independent of the church. His income is good. Still, he is not young, and I must not conceal from you, my dear, that I think his health is not over strong. I know nothing else against him. That makes him a perfect match, by the way. He's going to die soon? Terrific. You get to live the rest of your life off his money. Go, girl. That's not what Dorothea is thinking, but that's how I would think. If I were Dorothea, I should not wish to have a husband very near my own age, said Dorothea with grave decision. I should wish to have a husband who was above me in judgment and in all knowledge. And that's uncomfortable to read when you're a modern reader because, oof. Mr. Brooke repeated his subdued, oh, well, I thought you had more of your own opinion than most girls. I thought you liked your own opinion. Liked it, you know. I cannot imagine myself living without some opinions, but I should wish to have good reason for them, and a wise man could help me to see which opinions had the best foundation and would help me to live according to them. Very true. You couldn't put the thing better. Couldn't put it better beforehand, you know, but there are oddities and things, continued Mr. Brooke, whose conscience was really roused to the best he could for his niece on this occasion. Life isn't cast in a mold, not cut out by rule and line and that sort of thing. I never married myself, and it will be better for you and yours. The fact is, I never loved anyone well enough to put myself into a noose for them. It is a noose, you know. Temper now, there is temper, and a husband likes to be master. I know that I must expect trials, uncle. Marriage is a state of higher duties. I never thought of it as mere personal ease, said poor Dorothea. Well, you are not fond of show, a great establishment, balls, dinners, that kind of thing. I can see that Casaubon's way might suit you better than Chetham's. And you shall do as you like, my dear. I would not hinder Casaubon. I said so at once, for there is no knowing how anything may turn out. You have not the same tastes as every young lady and a clergyman and scholar, who may be a bishop, that kind of thing, may suit you better than Chetham. Chetham is a good fellow, a good, sound-hearted fellow, but he doesn't go much into ideas. I did when I was his age. But Casaubon's eyes, now I think he has hurt them a little with too much reading. Oh, I should be all the happier, uncle, for more room there. I'm sorry. I should be all the happier, uncle, the more room there was for me to help him, said Dorothea ardently. You have quite made up your mind, I see. Well, my dear, the fact is, I have a letter for you in my pocket. Mr. Brooke handed the letter to Dorothea, but as she rose to go away, he added, there is not much hurry, my dear. Think about it, When Dorothea had left him, he reflected that he had certainly spoken strongly. He had put the risks of marriage before her in a striking manner. It was his duty to do so. But as to pretending to be wise for young people, no uncle, however much he had traveled in his youth, absorbed the new ideas, and dined with celebrities now deceased, could pretend to judge what sort of marriage would turn out well for a young girl who preferred Casaubon to Chetham. In short, woman was a problem which, since Mr. Brooks's mind felt blank before it, could be hardly less complicated than the revolutions of an irregular solid. And that's the end of chapter 4. So, looks like Dorothea is going to marry Casaubon. And we think back to that opening passage about, well, I put the book down too soon. Let's just take a quick look at that opening passage of chapter 4, the quotation. Okay. Our deeds are fetters that we forge ourselves, I truly, but I think it is the world that brings the iron. So Dorothea is forging some fetters for herself. And she is going to find herself, and these are not spoilers. I mean, she's going to marry Casaubon. I won't tell you anything more than that. And I think it's interesting that quotation and how it works into the theme of that chapter in sort of the position that Dorothea is in. And so a man makes a mistake in the 19th century, and it doesn't always necessarily ruin his reputation, whereas a woman can make a mistake in the 19th century or the 20th century or the 21st century for all time. And that can ruin her far more than it can ruin a man. And so she is in some danger, I think. I mean, I don't want to make it like not peril. She's not going to die from this, but she's choosing very specifically to be with this older gentleman because it's a pathway to education for her, which would be limited for girls, except for things like needlepoint, voice, piano, how to order the servants about in a way that makes them not want to kill you, which the French didn't cover, and then the revolution happened. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if it's a good match. I understand the match, but I don't know that it's good. Anyway, I love you. I love that you're listening. I am grateful to be doing this, and I will be back with chapter 5 tomorrow. This has been Footnotes with Mike Bevel, and I'm reading the book Middlemarch. Thank you very much. And we're just going to do this where I try to look like I'm not watching where the end meeting for all thing is. I found it. So we can just maintain eye contact until I click stop.